Your dad was a Vietnam veteran,
Yes, sir.
and in your memoir, you write about the impact of Agent Orange on him and how that was so destructive of his health. Um, how would you say that the Vietnam War affected your dad? I don't know if psychologically is the right word, but just in kind of how he approached the world. And really, I mean, the question I'm getting at is as you think about your dad as a Vietnam vet, you think of yourself as an Afghanistan combat vet. I'm wondering how you would compare how the war sort of lived with him. You've got the Agent Orange issue, but I'm thinking more about, just kind of the way you think
Oh,
about
yes,
the
sir.
way you approach the world, and then how does the war still live with you? I mean, so how would you compare the way the experience of combat lived with your dad and how it lives with you?
Like coming back in the late 60s and early 70s, those Vietnam vets had to bury it. Like my father, his first experience was landing at the airport and seeing the protesters and, the chants and the baby killer and all that stuff. So he basically just, went in the bathroom, took the uniform off, and just glided into civilian society. You know how nowadays you see a lot of Vietnam vets that might wear the Vietnam vet hat. That did, nowadays as they're older boomers, but that didn't exist in the 70s. Like they came home, went to work, didn't tell nobody about their service because they didn't get to thank you for your service. They got the this, and so he just came home and started his family, blue collar worker, uh, probably real busy. Uh, so then when I came back from the war, I was realized, I realized I'm having some issues, and I'm thinking, damn, man, did my father handle this better than I did? So, because I didn't really see much from him, most of his stories were kind of funny, this or that.
Hmm.
And then, so when he was in hospice care, and I was trying to help take care of him, and I was sleeping in another room, I could hear the nightmares. And I knew Steck and Charlie were a couple of his buddies from Vietnam, and he'd be screaming for Steck and Charlie in his sleep. And then one time I heard he's like, just shoot the motherfucker, you know? So, and then I walked in the room and I was like, hey, man, what the hell's going on? Steck and Charlie ain't here. And then he popped out of it and said, what the hell are you talking about? Like, I said, you're in here talking to Steck and Charlie. And he's like, I don't know. What the hell are you talking about, son? He just popped out of it. And he didn't know what the hell was going on. But I heard a few of those type of nightmares, screaming, Steck and Charlie, shoot them.
And
So that's what I saw. Kind of that was at the end of his life, though.
a lot of times Vietnam vets say, the war was terrible. Here I'm talking about combat vets, so that was terrible. And then they say, and then we came home and experienced like what you described. We experienced what your dad experienced. And some vets say, and that's what really made things hard over the years. But
Makes sense.
but
Yeah, it makes sense.
right, but then the Iraq and Afghanistan guys come home and there's the thank you for your service, and there's all
Right.
the people at the airports cheering and so on, but it looks like
It almost feels
bringing
like lip service, and then it goes downhill from there.
well that's what I want to ask you about, because it seems like the Afghanistan and Iraq combat vets, it's not really that different from the Vietnam guys, despite the thank you for your service. And so what's your reflection on that?
So let me back it up for a second. So another similarity is, and obviously we'll get into this. At some point in Afghanistan, I'm realizing, well, damn, we're making the same mistakes that we're out here with a hand. We're doing this with a hand tied behind our back. I remember my old man saying the problem with Vietnam is we always had a hand behind our back. So in Afghanistan, we're making the same mistake. So then it seems like, so we get back from Afghanistan. I don't, the country realizes that they treated the Vietnam vets like shit, and so they wanted to be better for us. So then you get a lot of the thank you for your service and all that. You get that lip service, right? So let's say coming back from the tour as an Afghan Iraq vet, you get that initial thank you for your service. Uh, and then a lot of these veterans, they have issues for whatever reason, and so on the cover, on the surface, to the outsider, they think, well, we're treating these vets right. Everybody thanks them for their service and this and that. But in reality, like 2 or 3, 4, 5 years after the Iraq drawdown, and some of these veterans are matriculating into the civilian world, all of a sudden the unemployment rate for the Iraq and Afghanistan veterans is like triple the national average. And so, yeah, you're thanking us for our service, but it's tough. It's tough out here, trying to get a job. You're battling these demons, and the way, and me personally, I had a damn good resume. 2 branches of service, a college degree, all this stuff, but I wasn't getting the jobs I was applying for. And when I look back at it now, it was probably because I was putting off bad energy. So I was kind of in a miserable state, uh, and I was putting off bad energy. And I think that a lot of Iraq and Afghanistan veterans, they just putting off a lot of bad energy. To give a specific example, like one time when I had a certain job, a shitty job I didn't necessarily like, but I had to have it. I was in a stage where I was having a lot of nightmares. So, when I was a kid, you have nightmares. I used to be, what the hell, nightmares? You wake up from them. Who gives a shit about a nightmare? You have a nightmare, you wake up. So when I started having these intense nightmares, uh, you know, I'm waking up sweating, and I mean sweating my ass. I mean, my sheets are soaked. You know, the mattress, everything's soaked. When I pop up, I'm like, I got to be at work in an hour or a half hour. And so then, I just woke up from the worst nightmare. And I'm sweating my ass off. And then I got to be at work. So what kind of energy do you think I'm putting off at work an hour later? And sometimes what's crazy about it is, living here in Missouri in the wintertime, it get zero temperature sometimes. I've woke up sometimes and I'm standing in my bathroom brushing my teeth and just sweating my ass off. I mean, the mat that I'm standing on is just drenched. And I'm like, I got to go to work. How do I stop this? And actually got dressed, got in my vehicle, maybe 10-minute drive to work. And it's 0 degrees outside. And I'm rolling to work with both my windows down, just praying that this cold ass breeze is going to dry this sweat up so I can at least look normal when I get to work. And
Yeah.
I don't look like an asshole. Like I'm rolling down the freeway, windows down. Then I'd get to a red light, roll the windows up, so I don't look like an asshole. And get to work. Hopefully that sweat's blowing off, and then I gotta get to work. So the Afghan Iraq homecoming, it looks good. It looks good on the surface, but it's pretty shitty on the inside. You know
Let
what I
me
mean?
let me ask you this, man. So you refer to fighting demons. And so, I'm gonna think that these are demons that you pick up in Afghanistan that come home with you.
Yes, sir.
So talk about one or two of those demons. What are one or two of those demons that you picked up in Afghanistan that came home with you on the plane?
A lot of the demon is I wanted to fight. I had no problem. I signed up at an older age. I wanted to go over there and do what I wanted to fight. But the demon was, I felt like they were leaving us out to dry. If I'm in a firefight on a patrol and I can see the enemy, I can shoot back. But when we're taking mortar fire, when the enemy's firing mortars at us, and just to back up, most of the time I was always on a tiny little outpost with 30 or 40 people, right? And so the biggest weapon we had was a 50, crew serve weapon, 50 caliber machine gun in the towers, 50 caliber 240 machine gun. We had a mortar pit, but yeah, so if the enemy's firing at us firing rockets at us from a few miles away. The 50 cal, nothing we got is any good. Nothing we got can touch them. So the only thing that can handle this for us is the bigger base. That's the bigger fob, the forward operating base that's about 7 miles away. They have to fire rockets, and they know where these rockets are coming from. So the enemy's firing rockets at us. We don't have anything that can effectively repel it. So then our lieutenant, calling up the main base for a fire mission, and most of the time it got denied. And so you're sitting there like, what the fuck? If there was an enemy, I could shoot them, but since they're several miles away and I can't see them, I got to depend on the fob. And so the
And
lieutenant calls for a fire mission, and then and I'd hear it on the radio. I'd hear this. I'd say it'd be denied, and I'd look at one of my. I wouldn't say it, but I'd look at one of my buddies like, "What the fuck?" And so, and this was what gave me the most anxiety. I would rather, like I said, I'd rather be getting shot at in a close quarters type thing, because you don't know where that rocket's going to land, and you don't. There's nothing you can do about it. The fact that we're out here taking fire, and our higher ups won't do anything about it. And
why
the
why would
question
they
is
why would they deny the fire missions? What was the reason?
to minimize civilian casualties is really the only that's so. And like when people think that we're over there just indiscriminately killing people, no, I mean we went out of our way uh, to our own demise, I guess you could say. But that was the frustrating, and that's a lot of the demon. Knowing, like we was talking about my father, knowing my father fought with a hand behind his back, and I'm doing the same thing. In one of the specific situations, to get specific, and this is later in the tour, just to kind of drive it home to people, to kind of how extreme this was we were at the out Morgal. So we tore down the outpost, right? So we had a perfectly good combat outpost, nothing special, on top of the mountain, and the order came down to tear it down. So we tore this thing down to a mountain, and this was the most dangerous area in our area. So we tore this outpost down to a complete mound of dirt, told that we'll never have to come back here. We're tearing this down and leaving. Guess 2 days later, hey guys, pack your shit. We're going back to Margall. So then we go back to Margall to man a bare piece of dirt. Like, why did we tear down the outpost? When we tore down the outpost, now we're back out here a few days later to man the bare piece of dirt, right?
Here's what I'm hearing you say. I mean, one thing that's incredibly frustrating and that, leads to, we're talking about using this language of the demons. One of them, there are two things I'm hearing you say. One is that, and I'm interpreting what you're saying, but here's one of the things that it feels like the officers who have the power to say yes or no to this,
Way high, yes, sir.
yeah, that they care more about the civilians over there, among whom the Hajis are working, right? They care more about them than they do about the soldiers.
You hate to think of it that way. Well, so that specific people can draw their own conclusions. So we're at Margall. We tore the outpost down, and see that's a lot of the demon is the frustration over the bad decisions. Now, I think to answer that, when I look back at it, I think a lot of those way up people who were still they're in Bagram. I mean, when you're on Bagram, there's Pizza Hut and Dairy Queen. You wouldn't even know you're in a war zone. There's half of the places like European women. There's country line dancing night at the whatever. They got country line dancing going on, and I don't know, Gothic night. Each night something different. So I think they're big up commander. They're comfortable on that nice fob, and when 30 grunts are catching a few rockets somewhere way away, they'll be all right. It's probably easy to say, they'll be all right when you're sitting in your office. But so the specific one, so we go back to Margall to man the area that we just tore down the outpost. And I remember a specific incident. We're out there not a lot of protection, no bunkers, no nothing, and we start taking incoming rocket fire. Uh, we don't even have no mortar pit. We really do just have the crew serve weapons. So this interpreter, Haji and Haji interpreter, he comes in the we're just kicking it, and he comes running in there real nervous. He's nervous as hell, and he's like, because we had interpreters scanning their radio traffic, listening to what they were saying. So he was like, they're about to fire 5 rockets at us. They're about to fire 5 rockets at us. And we're like, okay. So the interpreter got the gist over the radio. And then we had some guys on a higher up on a mountain, a couple guys on an outpost. And then they radioed in. They could see them. Yeah, we see the guys. They're prepping. They're prepping their rockets from the back of a pickup truck. So we got the gist, the radio gist. We got people with eyes on it. So the lieutenant calls the FOB and requests a fire mission, and it got denied. And I remember just sitting across from my buddy Gus, and I'm like, "What the hell, man? Are they trying to get us killed over here?" And so they denied the fire mission. But this guy named Dusty, he's a mortar guy. He comes in there and he's like, "Maybe they'll let us fire illumination rounds." And so that he's like, "That's the only chance. Fire illumination. Maybe that'll deter it." So the lieutenant radios back, requests to fire illumination rounds. So they tell us we can fire 5 illumination rounds. So they fire 5 illumination rounds through the mortar tube, and they just pop up right above the people who are preparing the rockets. And then all of a sudden, the interpreter hears over the radio, because those flares, they just brighten it up, and then the interpreter hears, "Oh shit, they see us. We got to get out of here." So the guys on the hill, they watch them pack their shit and drive off. So we're just letting them live to see another day.
Mm.
I mean,
Yeah.
why? I'm not the most gung ho dude in the world, but you should be killing those dudes. You should be killing them if they're
Well,
trying to kill you.
it sounds to me like you guys are being you've got an officer on the scene, and it sounds like you guys, when it comes to these kinds of things, you guys are being micromanaged
Oh
by
yeah,
people who aren't on the ground, who have no real idea what's going on. And
yes sir.
they're worried about being on, being shown on CNN because of
Right.
something that might happen. The more it sounds, I don't want to, put words in your mouth, but it sounds to me like what you guys might be feeling is that these officers are more concerned about showing up on CNN than
Career
about whether we get killed or not.
and career. Now, one thing I want to say in a silver lining to this, uh, as much as that kind of stuff happened, now, if we were on the ground, like if we were on a patrol, walking or driving, now we never got the first shot, obviously, never got the first shot,
Mm.
because we're always playing defense.
Right.
Uh, but I tell you this, though, whenever we can control it, like if we ever got ambushed on a patrol, yeah, guns were up blazing. They shoot at us, we're firing back, you know, but that, yeah, but that's on, but whenever you had to depend on somebody else, 9 times out of 10, the fire mission got denied. And
Yeah.
bureaucratic, maybe some lieutenant colonel in this chain of command write his book and tell us all why. You asked for the frustration and the demon, and the way I'm ranting now, I think the biggest demon is feeling like they didn't have our back. Now, I can't imagine the Vietnam vet coming home, the way society was dumping on them, how they must have felt society not having their back. You know,
Yeah.
it's kind of it's a double-edged sword. You feel like they don't have you back. You come home, and most of society does give you the thank you for your service. So you feel like, well, at least they appreciate it on the surface. That whole political nation building game, and trying to bring Stone Age people into the first world, it don't happen. Sure, after World War II, we helped build Japan and Germany up into modern countries with global economies that produce automobiles and electronics, and a great trading partner in the world, a great first world country. Afghanistan's never going to be that. The literacy rate's like less than 20%. the people live in the Stone Age. And when I say they live in the Stone Age, mud houses and no running water and no at least where I was at, people see these videos of Kabul, and it might Kabul didn't exist in my world, baby. Where we was at, mud houses, no running water, no nothing, and we're trying to create some Japan or Germany out of this.
As you're there, you're spending your tour there, 2009, 2010. You're experiencing combat. You're seeing what's going on in Afghanistan. Did you ever did you ever think that this mission could work? That Afghanistan actually could
No,
be
hell
a
no.
functional country?
Here's one of your questions to kind of get me going. Like, so you first get there, you're motivated. I'm motivated to be here, do the job, and then as the tour drags on, and the denied fire missions, and looking for Bo Bergdahl, and those type of things start dragging on you, and then so you got enough time to think. You're there for a solid year. Anybody that tells you, "Oh, I don't talk politics," when you're there for a full year, and the way I describe it, you read an 80,000 word book, it seems like it's just thrilling, action packed, wall to wall. When in reality, it's 99% just boredom and suck, and 1% high intensity. So you get a lot of time to think about it. And but as far as I knew from the get go that when I'm walking around and I'm seeing people, when the whole landscape looks like it could fit in 500 years ago. Like, I'm thinking nothing about this could look any different than 500 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I knew these. And when the literacy rate is less than 20%, and then the A&A, so that'll get us into that, because you asked me about the competence of the Afghan National Army, A&A, Afghan National Army. The first time I knew they were incompetent was they sent us to do a mission with them. The first time we're ever going to do a mission with the Afghan National Army. So we drive from our little outpost at Malik Shea to Fob Boris to see that for the first time. And we go to meet the Afghan platoon that we're going to run the mission with. And I see all these damn rocks and sticks in the ground. And I'm like, what is this stuff? And then I see this American talking through an interpreter to the Afghans. Basically, what they were doing is they were describing the mission using rocks and sticks. And I looked at old Joey C and I said, damn, dude, these guys can't read fucking maps. And he's like, yeah, man, we got to draw this shit in the dirt like sandlot football. So when you're drawing shit in the dirt like sandlot football, that's an incompetent army. And that's what I knew from right then and there, that we ain't ever this. Hey, the way it all ended. Hey, man, when you damn trying to raise an army that can't read maps in a damn GPS world, when this all ended and they dropped their weapons and it all ended in a clusterfuck, hey, every grunt knew that was going to happen.
So obviously you're talking about all this stuff, and so I'm sorry, not Vietnam. Afghanistan is front and center right now because you're talking about it. But in the normal course of life, when no one's talking about Afghanistan, I mean, to what extent is Afghanistan always present, even if you're not talking about it, even if you're not really thinking about it? To what extent is your year in Afghanistan just with you all the time?
Um, yeah, it's always there. One reason I wrote the book was to try to air it all out and let it go once and for all. Just put it all out there and try to let it go.
Mm.
But it's always there. And as we get older as men, you miss the guys. Like, I'm in my mid 40s now. The guys I was with, they're in their 30s. And it's been going 15 years since the deployment, and probably like you hear, I just miss the fellas, man. It's almost like you wish we could all live in the same neighborhood. We just have the whole platoon living in the same neighborhood, just growing up as men together. But now we're all just our separate ways. And like I said, I'm finally at a decent place with it. I struggled for a decade. I was suicidal. I wanted to kill myself. Um, I knew too many guys in their 20s. Like, so the way it follows you, right? So, let's say 8 years after the tour, you're kicking it. Maybe you're having a good day, doing things are going good. And then you get that text message that said, oh, so and so just passed away, you know, and that just puts you right in it, you
Passed away
know,
at his own hand.
right. And see, so from one tour, so one, two, five guys that I know personally. I mean, and I'm talking about personally. I'm not talking about somebody I knew of, somebody that I had good, tangible conversations. Five young men died at their own hand. One mysteriously, one was murdered. Uh, one of my good friends, who was the company medic, uh, committed an armed robbery. Within a couple years after his, this guy served 15 months in Iraq, 12 months in Afghanistan. And here's what's crazy about this all sounds cliche. So this medic was one of the best leaders I knew. He was a sergeant. He used to give classes in front of the company, very squared away. Whenever he was off work, he was always dressed well, wearing slacks. I got to know him because I was an older guy, and we kind of took. And so uh, what he got kicked in his most squared, one of the most squared away leaders. I really mean that. Somehow we get back, and he got kicked out of the army because he pulled a knife on a cabbie. Pulls a knife on a cabbie, gets kicked out of the army. Then he goes back home to Texas, and he commits an armed robbery. And while he was on bail for the armed robbery, he robbed a bank. So now we got multiple armed robberies and federal and state, and so he was sentenced to 25 years in prison. That what was it the prosecutor said, if I'm quoted, this defendant received training to protect and defend our nation, but he used that training against the citizens he took an oath to defend. And he spent 10 years in prison. A lot of us have demons, and that medic is not the only guy that I served with who spent over a year in prison. Several guys got locked up, and the barracks after the tour was an animal house, man. And this is kind of where it gets funny. Like, I mean, the barracks was an absolute animal house after the tour. I mean, you imagine, a brigade full, 3 to 5,000 uh, young soldiers released on the city of Anchorage with all these demons. It got nasty, man. It got nasty. Just craziness would happen in the barracks, like just craziness, man. I think everybody's dealing with it better now. Those of us who made it through this far, um, I think we're starting to find our place and starting to kick ass and take names. There's so many of us that could have kicked ass and took names, but we just got drugged down. And I think we're all starting to pull through that mud and starting to make an impact on this society. A lot of these guys are dealing with their demons positively or the right way, or maybe they're dealing with it and you don't think they are, but they really are. When I was suicidal and I confined myself for several years, I sat and stared at walls because I didn't feel I was worthy. I didn't feel that I was worthy to be around anybody. Whenever the biggest fear that I had was my phone buzzing or pinging, because I didn't want to deal with the person texting me. They might be asking me, "Hey, you want to go to a game or something?" That was my biggest fear. I just isolated, and then and I found out that a lot of people did the same thing. You just isolated, man. You just, for whatever reason, and I think a lot of people think a lot of these suicides are due to like survivor's guilt, and I don't doubt that at all. And I mean, I've said a minute, I've traded places with Julian too. But to me, it's not survivor's guilt. from my own experiences, and I'm not an expert, I'm not a doctor, but from my suicidal thoughts and from my buddies who did it, too many, I think a lot of the reason for the suicide is these guys come back with their issues and they get in some type of little trouble. Like you get a DUI, right? And one DUI is obviously not the biggest deal in the world or whatever. I mean, but I guess, guys come back, their issues lead them to get into some type of trouble, maybe some type of trouble with the law. Uh, they get into that funk, and all of a sudden, like here's what I was saying to myself when I was suicidal, and the friends that I talked to, which would be good. Like we need to be talking about this in group because I just felt like a loser, man. Like let me just quote it, like had I died in combat, I would have been a hero. I would have gone out this world a hero, died in combat, but since I didn't die in combat, now I'm back in this, I used to be a damn badass infantry soldier, kicking ass, taking names, and now I'm back in the civilian world in this damn funk. And so I'm sitting there telling, had I died in combat, I wouldn't be a loser. Had I died in combat, I wouldn't have got arrested. Had I died in combat, I wouldn't be serving in prison. Had I died in combat, I wouldn't have this shitty ass job that's unfulfilling. Had I died in combat, I wouldn't be in this failed relationship. You know, so you got, like I said, I think a lot of the problem with Iraq and Afghanistan vets for some, they have a lot of negative energy brewing from the tour, and that negative energy, a lot of people see it and they don't want to be around it, and that stuff just sulks up, and when you just feel like the biggest loser, that's what a lot of like my one buddy told me. I'll quote him. He was like, uh, I was an accomplished athlete in high school. I was a varsity track star. I was an Eagle Scout. With the Boy Scouts, Eagle Scout. you know, I got my college degree. I'm after my tour. I'm very successful, but for some reason in 2012, I'm sitting in an apartment with a pistol to my head, asking myself, why don't I just do it? Because you just felt unworthy. And I think a lot of it is these guys come back. If you don't hit that success, like maybe some people get right back from tour, they get into a good job and a good situation. Because I do think I think being busy helps. I think when you asked me about like my dad, I think a lot of my dad was just busy. He come back, he was busy, he was working. I think a lot of guys they just sit around too much time on their hands in a funk. And to get back, you asked about the group. Just to sum it all, one of the best things that did help me is I did finally end up in this like this group. Not I don't mean to demean. I didn't get nothing out of one-on-one counseling. I didn't, a 28-year-old with a PhD sitting in front of me when, I just didn't get nothing. But when I finally sat in a group with like 12 or 13 of us, Vietnam vets and, you know, people in the same boat, that's what did the best for me. We got to end this suicide thing, man. The suicide thing is real. This generation, we're going to know more people who took their own lives than died on the battlefield. And that's part of the reason I think we're doing this here is to try to end that epidemic because it's an epidemic, and
Well,
hopefully this helps.
yeah, yeah, and I'll just end up, I mean, by just putting out the word, I think sometimes, I mean, combat vets rightly say that people who've never experienced combat have no idea what it's like, and that's true. And it's also true that there's not a lot of listening going on these days, but there are some people who are interested, and there are some people who are listening. And I'm just
Yes,
gonna put
sir.
out the call to the Afghanistan and Iraq vets. I'm right here,
Well,
and
I
I
appreciate that,
want I
sir.
want to hear what you have to say.